When most people think of policing in Oxford, they picture a very specific kind of detective, someone cerebral, impeccably dressed, and solving complex murders among the academic elite. But the actual history of Oxford streets looked very different. Its earliest police units grew out of a fierce struggle between rival factions. The gentlemanly image we see on screen today hides a dark legacy. The law was often used as a mechanism for the city's elite to monitor and manage the working poor. To find the roots of this conflict, we have to look back to the early 1800s. At the time, Oxford was effectively a divided city, operating under two entirely different power structures. On one side was the town, the local merchants, tradespeople, and citizens. On the other was the gown, the wealthy academics and administrators of Oxford University. In 1825, the university secured a massive legal advantage. A new Universities Act gave the school the power to appoint its own private constables, known locally as the Bulldogs. The Bulldogs patrolled within 4 miles of campus, arresting anyone they deemed a night walker, effectively criminalizing homelessness. Outraged city merchants retaliated by funding their own rival force, the Watch and Ward, to compete for the exact same streets. Professional policing in Oxford began as the deployment of 2 private armies, each securing the interests of a different branch of the city's power structure. For decades, these 2 groups split the city. City watchmen patrolled during the day, and university bulldogs took over the city at night. What finally ended the standoff was the Industrial Revolution. As Oxford's factories grew, the expanding working class became a mutual threat to their shared interests. In 1868, they reached a financial truce. They merged their separate patrols into a single Oxford City Police, funded by a 60-40 split between the town council and the university. While the elite saw this as a practical administrative solution, many working-class citizens viewed the united force as an invasive presence to keep them in check. The tension turned violent just a month after the merger. A young constable named Joseph Gilks was sent to disperse a crowd in St. Ebbs, one of the city's most impoverished industrial neighborhoods. The crowd resisted. One woman threw a heavy meat dish at the officer, sparking a chase that ended with Gilks drowning in the Thames. The elite factions had finally resolved their internal feud, but they did so by institutionalizing a violent division between the authorities and the city's poor. This dynamic persisted long after the 19th century. In 1948, Constable Alan Dent joined the force, entering a post-war environment where resources were scarce and discipline absolute. Dent's daily reality involved no cars and no radios. He patrolled with a wool cape, a truncheon, and a pedal cycle. Night shifts were isolating, spent navigating thick, toxic pea super fogs, and manually checking locks on storefronts, with no way to call for backup. The old class divide still defined the job. One of Dent's primary duties was monitoring university students, who were required to display a green light to drive a car within the city. The policing was far from equal. Dent records large-scale student riots being tolerated as good-humored, while the force strictly penalized poor citizens, like a man arrested simply because his makeshift string belt snapped. Even a century later, the neighborhood Bobby was still enforcing a system that humored elite students while maintaining strict surveillance over the poor. By the 1960s, the government began phasing out local street-level forces in favor of massive, centralized regional bureaucracies. In 1968, the local identity of the Oxford City Police was erased as it was absorbed into the newly created Thames Valley Constabulary. The transition triggered intense, closed-door friction over how 2 neighboring counties would split the bill. This dispute over transitional relief saw the Home Office quietly change rules, lowering taxes for Buckinghamshire while forcing Oxfordshire to pay significantly more to subsidize the new force. The final priority of this reform was administrative efficiency and financial leverage, effectively replacing the localized officer on the beat with a sprawling regional machine. Oxford's law enforcement has traveled a long path, from the private bulldog militias of 1825 to the impersonal regional bureaucracy of 1968. The evolution of the Oxford force illustrates how law enforcement can be deeply shaped by the class interests and administrative priorities of those in power. We often feel nostalgic for the Bobby on the beat, But we have to consider whether that system was truly a public service or just a more localized way of managing the city's social divisions. What's your take on the shift from local policing to these massive regional forces? Tell us in the comments and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden history of our institutions.